The night my father handed my sister the keys to our family restaurant, he stood in front of the entire staff with a champagne glass in his hand and called her the future of this business. Then he looked straight at me and said, "Some people just aren't built to carry a legacy." I still remember how quiet the room became after that. My sister Sela smiled like she had finally won something she deserved, while I stood there feeling like a stranger in the place where I spent most of my life. Before we dive into it, tell me in the comments where you're from. I love seeing the different places people tune in from. And if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss more stories like this. My name is Bryn Hale. My father, Conrad Hale, owned one of the oldest comfort food restaurants in Portland. People thought I would take over one day because I grew up beside my grandmother Nell in that kitchen. She taught me everything slowly, from cutting vegetables to making sauces from memory. I was there during busy weekends, power outages, and nights when we barely had enough money to keep the doors open. But none of that mattered to my father. Sela looked better for business. She dressed perfectly, spoke like a corporate manager, and knew how to impress investors. Dad cared more about image than loyalty. A week after giving her the restaurant, they changed the menu completely. Grandma Nell's recipes disappeared because Dad said they looked old-fashioned and cheap. I left quietly and rented a tiny diner across the street. The place was falling apart. Half the lights barely worked, and I could only afford to open at night. For the first few weeks, almost nobody came in. I started thinking Dad was right about me. Then one snowy night, a truck driver came in just before closing. He ordered my chicken stew and sat there silently for 10 minutes. When I asked if something was wrong, he looked at me with tears in his eyes and said, "This tastes like something my mom used to make before she passed away." After that, people kept coming back. The lines grew longer every night. Customers started leaving Sela's restaurant in the middle of dinner service just to eat at my diner instead. They kept saying the food felt warm and honest again. What destroyed my family in the end was the truth. Grandma Nell had been secretly teaching me for years because deep down, she already knew who truly cared about the restaurant. I spent 15 years inside my family's restaurant, while my sister Sela spent those same years chasing attention at business events, wine tastings, and networking dinners. I was the one arriving before sunrise to prep vegetables and staying after midnight cleaning grills. I knew every regular customer by name. I knew which booths wobbled, which cook called out every Friday, and which soup Grandma Nell made whenever someone in town lost a loved one. None of that mattered to my father, Conrad. To him, Sela looked like success. She wore expensive clothes, spoke confidently around investors, and knew how to make the restaurant appear modern. Dad loved that. He used to tell people Sela understood business, while I only understood kitchens. The day he retired, the entire staff gathered near the front entrance for a speech. I still had flour on my apron because I had been helping in the kitchen before he called everyone out. Conrad stood beside Sela and announced she would officially take over the restaurant. People clapped while I stood there shocked. Then he looked at me and calmly said the business needed a more refined direction. Right there in front of everyone, he told me I would no longer work there. I felt humiliated walking out, carrying my knives and recipe notebook in a cardboard box. Some employees wouldn't even look at me because they were scared of losing their jobs too. For weeks, I barely spoke to anyone. Then I found a tiny empty diner directly across the street from the restaurant. The rent was cheap because the place looked terrible. The booths were cracked, the kitchen equipment was old, and one side of the sign outside barely lit up, but it was all I could afford. I opened a late-night soup and sandwich spot using second-hand equipment and money I borrowed from an old family friend. Sela laughed about it to customers and called my place a midnight snack shack. At first, she seemed right because business was painfully slow. Then little by little, people started showing up. A retired teacher came in one night and froze after tasting my beef stew. He stared at me and quietly asked where I learned the recipe. A few nights later, an older couple said my chicken soup tasted exactly like the restaurant did 20 years ago, before everything became expensive and trendy. Soon, former loyal customers began leaving Sela's restaurant and crossing the street to mine instead. The lines got longer every week. One night, my father secretly walked into my diner close to closing time. He ordered Grandma Nell's meatloaf special without saying a word. After the first bite, he slowly lowered his fork because he recognized the recipe instantly. That was when I finally told him the truth. Grandma Nell spent years teaching me every recipe by hand because she feared the restaurant would one day stop feeling like home and turn into something cold, expensive, and fake. I always believed loyalty mattered more than image. My sister Sela believed the opposite, and somehow my father Conrad agreed with her. While Sela spent years attending investor meetings, charity dinners, and expensive social events, I stayed inside our family restaurant working double shifts beside the cooks and servers. I handled breakfast rushes, late-night cleanup, and weekend crowds when half the staff called in sick. I gave that restaurant most of my adult life. My grandmother Nell used to tell me that people remembered how a place made them feel more than how it looked. She built the restaurant from nothing and treated customers like family. I believed those lessons mattered. My father didn't. At the inheritance ceremony, Conrad stood beside Sela in front of employees, local business owners, and investors. He praised her for understanding modern success and talked about expanding the brand into something bigger. Then he looked at me like I was just another employee standing in the room. He thanked me for my years of hard work, but his tone felt cold and distant. It sounded less like appreciation and more like goodbye. That night hurt more than I expected. I sat alone in my apartment thinking about all the birthdays, holidays, and weekends I sacrificed for that restaurant while Sela barely spent time there at all. But none of my effort mattered, because Sela looked better in expensive clothes and knew how to impress wealthy people. A month later, I used almost all my savings to buy a diner directly across the street from the restaurant. The place was small and worn down. The kitchen fans barely worked, and the booths looked older than I was. I couldn't afford employees, so I did everything myself. I cooked, cleaned tables, washed dishes, and took orders until sunrise every night. At first, business was painfully slow. Some nights only 3 or 4 people came in. But slowly, old customers from the family restaurant started wandering through my doors. They would sit quietly after tasting the food, almost surprised by something they remembered. One older man told me my pot roast tasted like the restaurant did 20 years ago when Grandma Nell still ran the kitchen herself. Word spread fast after that. My diner became packed almost every night. Meanwhile, Sela grew angry watching customers leave her expensive restaurant and walk across the street to mine instead. She even started sending employees into my diner pretending to be customers so they could figure out my recipe. Then everything changed one Friday night when Martha, an elderly former waitress who had worked with Grandma Nell for decades, stood up in front of a crowded diner and told everyone the truth. Grandma Nell originally wanted me to inherit the restaurant, not Sela. But after Grandma died, Conrad ignored her wishes because he believed Sela would attract richer clients and make the business look more successful. The entire diner went silent, while my father sat across the street watching his restaurant slowly empty out. I sat alone near the back of the restaurant during my father's retirement party, while cameras flashed around my sister Sela all night. Employees carried trays of expensive drinks between tables, while investors crowded around my father, Conrad Hale, congratulating him for building one of Portland's most successful restaurants. I barely touched my dinner because deep down I already knew what was coming. Eventually, my father stood up and tapped his glass for attention. The room went quiet while he gave a speech about growth, change, and modernizing the future. Then he proudly announced Sela as the new owner of the family restaurant. Everyone applauded while she smiled beside him for photographs. I felt my stomach drop hearing it, but I still tried to stay calm. Then my father laughed and embarrassed me in front of everyone. He joked that I was better suited for greasy diners than real business. People around the room laughed with him. Some employees looked uncomfortable because they knew how many years I had spent working in that kitchen beside Grandma Nell. I quietly stood up and walked out before dessert was even served. For weeks after that night, I barely talked to anyone. I used almost all my savings to rent a tiny late-night grill directly across the street from the family restaurant. The place looked rough. Half the lights barely worked, the booths were old, and the kitchen equipment constantly broke down. I had almost no money left after repairs and supplies. Most nights I cooked alone until sunrise. I cleaned tables, washed dishes, and handled orders by myself because I couldn't afford employees yet. At first, business was terrible. Some nights I made so little money that I questioned whether opening the diner had been a mistake. Then one freezing evening, a nurse walked into my diner after finishing a long hospital shift. She looked exhausted and ordered my meatloaf special. After the first bite, she stopped eating and stared at the plate quietly for a few seconds. I thought something was wrong until she looked up at me and said, "This tastes exactly like the restaurant used to before it changed." She came back 2 nights later with coworkers from the hospital. After that, more customers started showing up every evening. Older regulars from the family restaurant slowly began crossing the street because they missed the meals they grew up eating. Soon my tiny diner was packed almost every night. Meanwhile, Sela kept changing the restaurant menu to impress investors. She removed traditional dishes one after another, and customers started complaining that the place no longer felt warm or familiar. My father became furious seeing long lines outside my diner, while empty tables filled his own restaurant during dinner service. Everything finally exploded one busy Friday night when Sela stormed into my diner and accused me of stealing recipes from the restaurant. That was when I finally told them the truth. Before Grandma Nell died, she personally gave me her recipe journals because she trusted me to protect the heart of the restaurant after she was gone. I had always felt invisible in my own family. My father, Conrad, treated my sister Sela like she could do no wrong. He praised her constantly because she looked elegant, had a business degree, and knew how to charm wealthy customers. Whenever investors visited the restaurant, he proudly walked beside her like she was already the future of the business. I was different. I stayed in the kitchen beside my grandmother Nell, learning recipes most people had forgotten about. While Sela attended social events and business dinners, I spent years cooking soups from scratch, baking pies before sunrise, and listening to Grandma explain why certain meals mattered to people. She always told me food was never just food. It was comfort, memory, and love during hard times. But none of that impressed my father. The day he handed the restaurant to Sela, I felt like I lost more than my future. I lost the only place where I had ever truly felt close to my grandmother. Watching Sela smile while everyone applauded made me feel like I never belonged there at all. After that night, I stopped trying to fight for my father's approval. Instead, I used my savings to open a tiny overnight comfort food spot directly across the street from the family restaurant. The diner looked worn down, and the flickering lights outside barely worked. Some nights snow piled against the windows while I cooked alone until morning. At first, business was painfully slow. I questioned myself constantly. Then, little by little, customers started showing up. An older man told me my beef stew reminded him of meals his wife used to make before she passed away. A retired couple said my chicken pot pie tasted exactly like the restaurant did years ago when Grandma Nell still ran the kitchen herself. Soon people started coming every night. Customers said the food felt warm and honest, in a way the family restaurant no longer did. Meanwhile, Sela kept changing the original menu to impress investors. Expensive dishes replaced simple comfort meals, and older regulars quietly stopped going there. As my diner became busier, Sela grew paranoid. She accused me of stealing recipes from the restaurant and turning customers against her, but the truth was far worse for her. One night during an argument inside my diner, I finally told her the truth. Grandma Nell willingly passed every recipe down to me herself. She spent years teaching me because she believed I understood something the rest of the family didn't. To Grandma, the restaurant was never about money, status, or wealthy customers. It was about making people feel cared for during the hardest moments of their lives. She trusted me with her recipes because she believed I understood people, not profits. The betrayal started years before the restaurant officially changed owners. Growing up, I was constantly compared to my sister Sela. My father, Conrad, called her the daughter with ambition every chance he got. Meanwhile, I was treated like unpaid kitchen help instead of family. While Sela attended business events and impressed investors, I spent my time working beside Grandma Nell in the kitchen, learning recipes, and helping keep the restaurant running. No matter how hard I worked, it never felt like enough for my father. Still, I stayed loyal to the business because Grandma Nell always told me hard work would matter someday. She believed people eventually showed their true character, and I trusted her. Instead, my father handed everything to Sela during a huge public celebration at the restaurant. Investors, employees, and reporters filled the dining room while he praised Sela as the future of the business. I stood there feeling embarrassed and angry while people clapped for someone who barely spent time inside the kitchen. After that night, I disappeared for weeks. I avoided everyone because I couldn't stand seeing the restaurant anymore. Eventually, I found an abandoned diner directly across the street. The place looked old and forgotten. The paint was peeling, the booths were damaged, and the kitchen equipment barely worked. Compared to the expensive remodel happening at the family restaurant, my diner looked tiny and worn down. But once I opened, something unexpected happened. Customers connected with my food almost immediately. I stayed open late every night, serving warm comfort meals while talking to people like they mattered. Slowly, older customers started returning because they said my diner reminded them of the restaurant back when Grandma Nell was alive. Then former employees from the family restaurant secretly started quitting and helping me. Some worked extra shifts at my diner after leaving Sela's management behind. They admitted they missed how things used to feel under Grandma Nell before money and appearances became more important than people. My father became furious watching my diner grow busier, while his own restaurant struggled to keep loyal customers. He accused me of trying to destroy the family out of jealousy. That was the moment I finally snapped. I told him the truth in front of everyone. The family had already been falling apart for years because of favoritism, disrespect, and his constant need to make Sela look perfect while treating me like I never mattered at all. I never wanted revenge at first. Honestly, all I wanted was to keep cooking the recipes Grandma Nell taught me before she passed away. Those recipes were the only thing that still made me feel close to her. I never cared about fancy investors or becoming the face of the restaurant. I just loved the kitchen and the people who walked through the doors every day. Everything changed after my father publicly fired me from the family restaurant. He didn't even do it privately. He announced that the business was moving in a new direction and replaced me with Sela's business school friends who barely knew how the kitchen worked. Standing there while strangers took over the place I helped build made me realize something painful. To my father, I never really mattered. Out of anger more than confidence, I rented a tiny diner directly across the street. The place was small, old, and honestly falling apart. Half the lights flickered at night, and the kitchen equipment barely worked. Still, I stayed open every evening cooking alone while watching crowds walk into the family restaurant through the front windows. At first, nobody came to my diner. Then, little by little, things started changing. Customers began crossing the street after trying Sela's expensive new menu. Some told me the food there felt cold and fake now. Others said my meals reminded them of how the restaurant used to feel years ago when Grandma Nell was still alive. Soon my diner became packed every night. People lined up outside for homemade soups, meatloaf, and fresh pie, while the family restaurant slowly lost regular customers. Sela became desperate watching it happen. At one point, she even tried buying my building just to shut me down completely. The final blow came a few months later. My father found an old recipe box that belonged to Grandma Nell. Hidden inside was a handwritten letter she left years earlier. In that letter, Grandma admitted I was always supposed to continue the restaurant's real legacy, because I cared about people more than money. Reading those words changed everything. For the first time in my life, I finally understood that Grandma had seen my worth even when my own father refused to. I spent most of my childhood beside Grandma Nell in the kitchen, while my sister Sela did everything possible to avoid kitchen work. Grandma taught me recipes slowly, one dish at a time. She showed me how to make soup from scratch, bake bread before sunrise, and season food without measuring anything. Some of my favorite memories were standing beside her, while the restaurant slowly filled with customers every morning. Sela never cared about any of that. She hated smelling like food and complained whenever Grandma asked her to help. But none of it mattered to my father, Conrad. To him, Sela represented success because she looked polished and confident around wealthy investors. He believed image mattered more than the people actually cooking the meals. During the official ownership transfer of the restaurant, my father embarrassed me in front of employees and business partners. While praising Sela, he looked directly at me and said, "Cooking isn't enough anymore." That sentence stayed in my head for weeks. After losing the restaurant, I used my savings to open a small overnight diner directly across the street. The place looked rough. The booths were cracked, the floors were old, and the neon sign outside barely worked. Most people ignored it completely at first. I spent long nights cooking alone while watching customers walk into the restaurant that used to feel like home. Then one freezing winter night, an elderly couple came into my diner just before closing time. They ordered Grandma Nell's beef stew recipe without realizing where it came from. After the first bite, they looked at each other in shock. The husband quietly told me the stew tasted exactly like the restaurant did years ago before everything changed. A few days later, they returned with friends. Then more people started showing up every night. Customers kept saying, my diner felt warm and familiar while the family restaurant now felt expensive and distant. Soon the place became packed. Sela couldn't handle it. She accused me of stealing recipes, sabotaging the restaurant, and trying to ruin the family business. But eventually, older staff members finally spoke up. They admitted I had done most of the cooking at the family restaurant for years, while Sela mostly handled appearances, meetings, and investors. Hearing the truth finally come out in front of everyone was the first time I felt truly seen by the people around me. I thought losing the family restaurant would be the worst pain of my life. I was wrong. The real pain came later when I overheard my father, Conrad, talking to investors during a private dinner. I was only a few feet away carrying trays from the kitchen when he laughed and said he only had one daughter truly capable of success. He was talking about Sela. He said it so casually, like I wasn't even there listening. That moment hurt more than losing the restaurant itself. After that night, I stopped hoping my father would ever see me differently. I took the old cookware Grandma Nell used for years and secretly saved before the restaurant remodel threw everything away. Then I opened a tiny comfort food diner directly across the street. The place was small, outdated, and honestly nothing special to look at, but it felt real to me. At first, business moved slowly. Then customers started drifting over after trying Sella's expensive new menu. People complained the restaurant no longer felt warm or welcoming. They missed the simple meals Grandma Nell used to make. My diner slowly became crowded every night, while the family restaurant started losing regular customers. The rivalry turned personal one evening, when Sella finally crossed the street and walked into my diner herself. She ordered quietly and barely looked at me while eating. But after the first bite, I saw the expression on her face change immediately. She recognized Grandma Nell's recipes right away. That was when she realized Grandma trusted me with everything instead of her. Sela left furious and demanded our father shut my diner down before I destroyed their business completely. But something unexpected happened after that. Late at night, after the restaurant closed, my father quietly started coming into my diner alone. He never stayed long, but I noticed he always ordered Grandma Nell's old recipes. I think deep down he finally understood he had destroyed the original restaurant chasing money, investors, and status instead of protecting what made it special in the first place. I spent years believing loyalty to family would eventually mean something. I worked beside Grandma Nell in the kitchen for most of my life while my sister Sella focused on appearances, investors, and media attention. I honestly thought all the long nights and sacrifices would matter one day. Instead, my father Conrad handed the family restaurant to Sella because she looked better in front of reporters and wealthy clients. I was pushed out completely, like I had never helped build the place at all. Losing the restaurant felt like losing the last connection I had to Grandma Nell. She taught me everything I knew about cooking and treated the restaurant like a second home for anyone who walked through the doors. After she passed away, the restaurant slowly became more focused on money and image than people. With nowhere else to go, I borrowed money from an old family friend and opened a tiny late-night diner directly across the street. The place was small and worn down, but I filled it with Grandma's handwritten recipes and the cookware she used for years. I stayed open late, serving homemade soups, meatloaf, sandwiches, and fresh pie to anyone who came in. Slowly, people started noticing the difference. Customers said my diner felt warm, personal, and real, compared to Sella's polished restaurant. Older regulars returned because they missed the comfort they used to feel years ago under Grandma Nell. Some nights people waited outside in the cold just for a bowl of soup and a quiet place to sit. As my diner became more successful, Sella grew obsessed with figuring out why customers kept leaving her restaurant for mine. She accused me of stealing recipes and trying to ruin the family business. The constant fighting started tearing the family apart. Everything finally came to a head one busy evening when Sella demanded to know why Grandma trusted me more than her. That was when I finally told the truth in front of everyone. Grandma Nell never wanted the restaurant to become trendy or corporate. She wanted it to stay a place where lonely people, tired workers, and struggling families could walk in and feel at home for a little while. And deep down, she knew I was the only one who truly understood that. If this story hit you emotionally, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves real-life betrayal and revenge stories. And tell me in the comments, whose side were you on in this story?